everyone, it's Michelle Lupton here, and I'm going to show you how I made this card using this flowy leaves stencil from Paper Rose Studio. So I'm just going to start with some white cardstock. So this is Nina Solar White 110 pound cardstock, and I'm just cutting it to the size of my card front. Later on I'm going to cut it down, so it doesn't really matter that much. And I'm just placing my stencil over it here. Now the stencil still has some adhesive on it, spray adhesive on the back, so pixie spray, from the last time that I used it. So it's just sitting there quite nicely. And I'm running it through my die cutting machine to just emboss with it. So I put my tan mats underneath it so that that stencil pressed into the cardstock. Now I'm going to be using 4 different Distress Oxide inks. So I've got Salty Ocean, I've got Mermaid Lagoon, I've got Peacock Feathers, and I've got Cracked Pistachio. So I started off with the Salty Ocean and worked my way from the most blue to the most green, and then I went back again to make sure it was nicely blended. So this cardstock at the moment not only has the colour from these Distress Oxides, but it also has the texture from running that stencil and cardstock through my die cutting machine. Now I've just made a puddle of water and I've splattered on some of that water over the stencil. Now I'm spraying on to my craft mat here some Perfect Pearl in water, and I always keep that in a little spray bottle ready to go. I use it quite often. And I'm using a very old paintbrush here that I use for all sorts of different things, and you'll see what I'm going to use it for next. Anyway, I'm just blotting off the excess water here to make sure I don't have any puddles. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just taking some liquid glue. This particular tube of liquid glue is very old, and at one stage I left it open overnight, so it's a little bit claggy. So I just took the nozzle out of it and just tipped some onto my craft mat. And I'm going to be using this to just colour in some of these open spaces of the stencil. I'm just drying off my cardstock just a little bit because I did add a little bit of water with that Perfect Pearl and the spray bottle. But I wanted it fairly dry before I added this glue. So I'm just yet adding the glue with this paintbrush. And I'm just sort of using a pouncing motion, and I'm doing this so that I can then add some Nuvo gilding flakes. These were a Christmas present from my sister and brother-in-law and their family, so thank you very much. And you can all blame Lydia Fiedler for this one, honestly, because, yeah, she's just a great enabler. She used it in one of her live videos that she's been doing most of 2020 on her Facebook, in her Facebook group, and I just couldn't resist. Now, usually I hate products like this because I just make a mess, an absolute mess. So I'm trying very hard here to not breathe while this jar is open, because these gilding flakes are so very delicate, and the smallest little puff of wind and they will just go flying. So all I'm doing now is after going over certain parts of these leaves with the glue, I'm just adding on the gilding flakes, and unfortunately there were some bits that I couldn't remember exactly where I'd put the glue, so I just had to put the gilding flakes all over the place and hope for the best. So the glue, I didn't add very much glue, but it basically was tacky enough to accept these gilding flakes. And I'm just using this little brush to rub them in to make sure they're nice and flat. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth are you doing this while the stencil is still in place? And that's a very good question, because it means that I'm getting gilding flakes all over the stencil wherever that glue has gone. However, if I had taken the stencil off after adding the glue and then add the gilding flakes, I would have got gilding flakes where the stencil had been stuck to the cardstock, because there would have been a bit of residual stickiness from that pixie spray that was on the back of the stencil. And I didn't want that. I only wanted the gold where there had been colour. I didn't want there to be gold where the stencil had been. So that's the reason for that. But it did mean that when I actually was finished here, I did end up with a whole lot of these gilding flakes actually stuck to the stencil. But it didn't matter. Right now I'm just cleaning it up, and it didn't take nearly as much time to clean up as I had expected it to. Honestly, I was expecting to have to get out like a Swiffer cloth or I've got a lint remover, little sticky thing on a wheel. I don't know what they're called. You know what you use to get rid of lint on your clothes and they're sticky? One of those. But I didn't. I just managed to scoop most of the gilding flakes back into the tub using the actual stencil, as you saw me do. And then I just wiped up the rest with a damp baby wipe, and I was pretty much done, and I just wiped over with my dry cloth, and I didn't really need any more. Now you can see I'm taking the stencil off now, and you can see that there was some sticky residue left, but I did manage to get that all off the stencil. I just took the stencil into the bathroom, dunked it in a basin of water, and got the nail brush onto it, and it took me less than a minute to scrub it down to get rid of those gilding flakes that were stuck. And you can see that absolutely gorgeous shine that you get from those gilding flakes that stuck to the glue. Now I loved this background so much that I didn't really want to cover up too much of it. So decided to go relatively simple and not too large with the sentiment. I wanted to keep the sentiment relatively small. So what I did is I cut out some the Hello die, which is also from Paper Rose. I use lots of Paper Rose products on this project. That Hello die I cut from some tonic gold mirror cardstock. And you can see I'm just using one of these little printed sentiments. This particular set of sentiments is particularly designed to go with some of the Paper Rose die sentiments, so the word dies. And you would have seen me actually going around the edge of that black printed sentiment with a black marker, because the paper that they're printed on is white, so if you want a nice sharp edge, you can just go around the edges with a black marker and you won't see that. Okay, I cut down my panel so that I had a little white border around the edge. I added it to a top folding note card. And now I'm just going to add the sentiment nice and simple. So I just used tape runner glue to add that on, just scraping off a tiny little bit of liquid glue that was on top of the gold letters. I'm just going to use my T-square ruler to make sure it's nice and straight, and that is it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful, and I hope you like the gold, and I will see you again next time. Bye!